Legally in Love, written and narrated by C. Taylor, edited to meet YouTube guidelines. To purchase the unedited book, please click the link in the description. Chapter 2. John hung up the phone, already planning on how he'd realized the threat he'd just given to Delaney and Ross. He'd already made all other firms respect him, but he hadn't dealt with this particular firm since his first case. Thank heavens his best friend didn't actually work there, or his plan might have been impossible. Luckily, Christian had gone into business and not law to build his fortune. He put the clock right in the middle of his desk while continuing to review the most recent settlement for one of his clients. His office was in one of the rougher neighborhoods, a lower rent area. Although he was careful to keep his fees low, he had made more than enough to move to a nicer office. Two things kept him from moving. First, this was his stomping grounds, where he grew up, and although his home life hadn't been the happiest, it still felt familiar. Second, he loved how uncomfortable the lawyers from the big firms clearly felt meeting him at his office. It was one of the main reasons he insisted on an early meeting here. It only took a couple of them being late before they all took his ultimatum seriously. He'd have to think of an extra vicious one for the biggest firm in town. He finished the document and pushed away from his desk. He walked to the wall of windows behind him. The area was industrial, and it always made him smile at the type of cars the lawyers would drive up in. Some looked like they were kissing their car goodbye when they left it parked at the curb. He had someone keeping an eye on them, but that was his closely guarded secret. What exotic, ridiculously expensive car would this one arrive in? He checked his clock. Whoever it was, he needed to hurry. 3 minutes to go. He looked back at the street and saw a very practical gray Chevy Bolt pulled to the front of the building. Not new. It had seen some things. One more scratch and it would look like it fit in the neighborhood. Lost tourist? A sunshield popped up in the front window. Whoever it was looked like they were staying for a while. Somebody got some bad directions, clearly. His office was about the only active business on the street. Intrigued, he watched as the driver's side door opened and out stepped. Everything inside him went cold and hard at the same time. It was Emma. A string of curse words escaped his mouth with his breath, and she had the nerve to look perfectly comfortable in his neighborhood. Her slight figure and delicate face still as beautiful as it had been the first time he'd seen her. Her wide hazel eyes had shaken him to his core. The odd sensation repeated every time he saw those eyes, which was a rare event. He was both frustrated and grateful for that. "She's your best friend's little sister, definitely off limits," he chanted to himself over and over as his body reacted to her presence the way it had since he rescued her from an unfortunate college party. She was smiling at Trevel, John's very large, very intimidating high school friend who was hanging out, leaning against the building. He hired him for freelance jobs like keeping an eye on whatever car pulled up today. He added the benefit of further intimidating whichever lawyer showed up, but Emma was smiling straight at him and walked toward him. Lucky bastard. She spoke with him a few moments, passed him what he assumed was some money to keep an eye on her car. She was smiling the whole time, not scared or intimidated in any way. As long as he'd known her, he'd only seen her scared twice. She was one of the bravest women he knew. She also wasn't naive, smart enough to have the money already in her hand instead of pulling it from her purse. Travel looked shocked, but within moments he relaxed, awkwardly took the money, and John was pretty sure he swore to guard her car with his own life. They both nodded heads, and she quickly turned to rush into the building. Travel looked up at John's window, locked eyes, and made a motion that conveyed a "what am I supposed to do with the money?" question. He was just paid twice for the same job. John motioned back to just keep it. He looked back at the clock on his desk and cursed again. That little exchange with Travel was going to make her late for the appointment. She would be in reception any minute. His paralegal would usher her into the office immediately. He didn't have much time. He grabbed the clock and turned it back a couple of minutes. He barely got it back on the desk before the door opened. "Mr. Mitchell, I swear I got here on time, but I saw this nice man on the sidewalk and asked if he could keep an eye on my car because this neighborhood is, well, I just really love my car," she explained in a rush. Nobody, to his knowledge, had ever described Trevel as a nice man. He had seen him make grown men cry and more than one wet themselves. He ignored how stunning she looked, as he always tried to. Her suit outlined her slim figure. Her hair was pulled back, enhancing her delicate jaw and enticing neck. Her natural beauty wasn't hidden behind heavy makeup. Parts of his body twitched to life, inspired by her mere presence. Steady breathing and thinking of her brother or his grandmother helped mitigate his body's rebellion. He just casually shrugged his shoulders. According to my clock, you still have 30 seconds. He suppressed a smile when she awkwardly froze, checked her wristwatch, looked back up at him and froze again. His paralegal also froze, but with more of a disappointed look on her face. She always liked how he handled tardiness. She apparently had a sadistic streak. He would no doubt hear about this later. He turned his clock to both of them as proof and raised his eyebrows, daring either to question him. Emma's eyebrows pulled together in confusion, looked back at her watch, and continued walking into his office. Someone must have set my watch a minute ahead, she muttered as she took the seat in front of his desk. His paralegal let out a soft but audible growl before closing the door. He took a seat behind his desk and waited for her to make the first move. Now, from Emma's perspective, his well-muscled arms showed below the rolled-up sleeves of his crisp white button-up shirt. His top button was undone and his tie pulled loose, showing a small dip of his neck. His attire, most likely intended to show a small amount of disregard or disrespect for opposing counsel, instead had her heart racing at first glance. He'd grown his hair out but kept it tied back in a knot and had a full but well-trimmed mustache and beard. His mother had been a mix of Turkish and Armenian descent and died soon after he was born, but passed him a rugged fierceness to his features. The overall look made for a primitive, nearly feral effect. Anyone who knew him less would have discounted the fact that he also had a brilliant mind that could have done anything, and he chose the law. She learned better than to underestimate him the first time they faced each other on that one case. It had been his first case, but it hadn't been hers, and he decimated her effortlessly. If her mother was right and she'd gotten off easy, she felt sorry for his other victims. At least she would almost feel sorry for them if her mouth hadn't gone completely dry at the sight of him. He was just sitting in his chair and would expect her to say something. Christian's best friend, she started chanting again to get her body to calm down. I understand Mrs. Winthrop is claiming her late husband left her controlling interest of his company. In the spirit of full disclosure, that's all I know about the case since I was rushed to this meeting. What did you want to talk about? From John's perspective, point Emma. With her first statement, she robbed him of his illusion of being in control. Any idea of intimidating her was out the window, and she actually had him feeling like a jerk for rushing her in the first place. Oh, how the tables have turned. He shifted uncomfortably in his seat. From what you said, you seem to be up to date. What legal right is she claiming? We have their prenuptial agreement on file. It leaves her a generous annual stipend, but no claims to her late husband's businesses or holdings. John was going to save the reveal of the document until after the first meeting, a practice he used to gauge opposing counsel's preferred strategy early in the game. Would they threaten? Would they intimidate? Would they bargain? She was being reasonable and ruining all his fun today. She claims to have a document dated after the prenuptial agreement written by Arnold indicating he wanted her to inherit 90% of his shares, which would give her controlling interest of all of his holdings. Her eyes squinted in distrust. Have you seen this document? I have, and though I'm not an expert, it does look authentic, John confirmed. And you've had it reviewed enough to feel confident to proceed to trial if the board disputes it? He tilted his head at her question. Oh, point you. I wouldn't be here if you hadn't. You're not the tilted windmill sort. You like the short thing. She broke off and turned red. Unconsciously, she repeated something Christian had said about him during one of their weekend trips to her family's house. It fit the current situation, but what Christian had been referring to back then meant something completely different. It had intrigued him how angry Emma seemed after Andi explained what they actually meant. With me, it's always a sure thing, he couldn't help adding with a subtle grin. It was the same response he always gave to the reference. Again, with his legal skills, it was still an accurate statement. His playful move backfired. Her eyes never left his this time. Eyelids narrowed, nostrils flared, and lips stiffened. She was angry. His body tightened again, but this time he gave up fighting and just tried to breathe through it. Handwriting experts, forensic analysis, paper and ink composition, all of it? She asked for clarification more sternly than he'd ever heard her be. Shifting his focus and his position in his chair, he leaned forward, elbows on his desk. "I am always very thorough," he said with the same smile. Expecting another flare of anger, he was utterly surprised when her face flushed and her pupils dilated. Backfire again, she was clearly aroused. What was happening? Christian's little sister. Whatever was happening needed to stop now. He took a deep breath and sat back, breaking eye contact. She did the same, looking down at her briefcase. A few moments later, she looked back at him. "My client will insist on countering with all their own experts, so this will go round and round until we both retire," she stated, but didn't sound happy at the prospect. Working with her into the foreseeable future sounded pretty good to him. Unfortunately, he had one more thing that would prove to be a quick close to the case if Emma's clients didn't comply. For the sake of his client, he couldn't release that information just yet. He regretted its effect on her once it came out. Again, cursed the firm for sending her. How could he possibly make the firm pay for this move without hurting her? He didn't like the feeling of being this helpless and aroused at the same time. "Is she willing to make any kind of a deal?" Emma finally broke the silence. It was a straightforward question, but it irritated him how eager she seemed to end their interaction before he got to enjoy the forced collaboration. With the case, of course. "For now, she's waiting for my recommendation, which is on hold until more of the reports come in." Emma nodded her head. "Okay, in that case, please let me know when we can have access to the document." She started to gather her things. He stifled an irritated growl. Why was she always in such a hurry to leave him? She had been since that first meeting. Christian had said her name. He felt lost in her hazel eyes, and the next thing he knew, she was gone. It was like trying to catch the white rabbit. Was the arousal he'd just seen the reason? He thought she didn't like him. Could she like him like he liked her? Just the thought was disorienting. He wanted to explore the thesis more. He tilted his head at her. "Is the meeting over?" he asked ominously. She froze mid-rise and looked at him. "You're right. You called the meeting. That was rude of me. What else did you want to discuss?" She sat back down and watched him. A flood of topics filled his mind. Where would she like to go on their first date? Where would she want to get married? What should they name their children? How many positions could he get her in before she collapsed from exhaustion from their lovemaking? His body stiffened again right before he realized he didn't have anything to add about the case itself. His confused and distracted mind tried to find something case-related to keep her there, in his office, with him forever. A car alarm sounded from the window behind him. One look at Emma's face let him know it was coming from her car. She bolted from her chair before he noticed the windows were also shaking. The L train passed close to his office more than 10 times a day. He'd worked there so long he hardly noticed anymore, but Emma looked terrified. She rushed to the window to check her car. He stood and moved beside her, about to let her know it was just the train, when her hand suddenly grabbed at his chest. That stopped him cold. Every muscle tensed hard. Her hand clenched in a fist at his shirt and pulled. Next thing he knew, she was huddled tight to his chest, shaking, saying something about an earthquake. Instinctively and reflexively, his arms wrapped around her, focused only on making her feel safe. In the entire history of the completely upside-down world that happened every time he got near her, there was never anything so completely wrong that felt so right. She was his best friend's little sister and about the purest, sweetest, kindest being he'd ever known. To say he was from the wrong side of the tracks was an understatement. Add to that the fact that he owed her brother everything he had now, and disrespecting either was not an option. He'd only come close to acting on his feelings one other time. Working that first case, sparring with her brilliant mind, was amazing. The final day, after the agreement was completed, he had opened the door for her. His body nearly moved on its own to pull her into his arms and finally taste her lips. He had to find something to give him the strength to let her go now. She was there in his arms, making him want to protect her, hold her, love her, possess her, take her now. Her head turned up, scared hazel eyes looked up at him, and his will returned. Whenever his loyalty to her brother faltered, it was always her innocence that did the rest. He had no right to even think about defiling her with his base desires and crude life. He shook his head and smoothed hair away from her face. No, not an earthquake. Just the 2:40 train a little early, he admitted softly and gently. Oh, so sorry. She stiffened and backed away. His white rabbit was off again. Instead of grabbing all her things, she just grabbed her keys and said a quick, "I'll be right back," before rushing out of the office. He had a few minutes to pull himself together. He took a series of deep breaths to get his body to relax. He heard the high-pitched off chirp from her car and the alarm silenced. She was already speaking with Trevel, who looked genuinely delighted to see her again. John would have warned him if he'd known she was the one coming. She could charm all but the truly evil. Again, he'd only seen her face that twice. He hoped to never see her face that again. He wished he could be the one that made sure it never happened. Right now, Trevel was smiling at her and laughing with her. He was wrong. She was way rarer than any simple white rabbit. She turned and headed back into the building. Shoot, he still hadn't figured out something else to discuss about the case. Before he could go through any of his notes, the phone rang.